Hey everyone, and welcome to the 57th episode of the Liam McCullum Show. This episode was recorded June 29th, 2021. In this interview, I talked to Alden Tonkay. He's running for House District 82 in Montana as a Republican, and he's currently a student at the University of Montana. He's got some very libertarian positions, and I really enjoyed talking to him about them. I think you'll be very impressed with a few of the policies he wants to propose. Remember to subscribe to the Liam McCullum Show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Here's Alden. All right, everyone. I have Alden Tonkay on. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me, Liam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to bring you on. I heard about you. You're running for office here in Montana, and you're kind of more of a liberty Republican guy. Do you want to just explain why you got into politics, where your interest started? I was a Republican in 2016, but as you know, I've become more libertarian over time. So I'm just curious, like, at what point in your life you were attracted to politics, and then how that development was and why you wanted to jump into it.
Yeah, so, I've always kind of, I come from a family that was very, they stressed the importance of politics to me and being involved. And actually, my first recollection of politics was the Obama-McCain election back in 2008. I remember sitting in my living room on the night of the election and watching the results come in. So that was kind of, I was fascinated by it from that point on. And ever since, I've just been extremely interested in politics, in policy making, and the difference that we can make through policy and through being engaged and involved. And since then, that's just continued to grow as I've worked on different campaigns, and now, working for an elected official, and now, into running for office.
Yeah, definitely. And so when you first talked to me and I reached out to you, you were running for one position, and that was in the Missoula area, and now you're running in another one. And you went to the University of Montana, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. So you would have represented that area, but do you want to just dive into like what ended up happening there? There's kind of an interesting story why you had to switch over.
Yeah, it is interesting. Obviously, I'm running as a Republican, but like you mentioned, a liberty-minded Republican. And it's pretty crazy, actually, when you think about these local races. You wouldn't think about, tons of money being pumped into them. But Senate District 49, which overlaps the House district I was planning on running in, House District 98, that's the number one target for the Democrats in 2022. They're going to dump every resource into keeping that seat blue, with Representative Cheetah running in that Senate district. And, they're throwing out numbers of, $500,000 into those races. And the district I was running in was going to be a blue district anyway. And I just thought, if I'm gonna work hard and spend the time, I want to give myself a shot. And I think it says something about the state of the Democratic Party, to be honest, when they're having to dump $500,000 into a seat that they currently hold to keep it that way. I think that kind of shows where they're at. But I think Helena was actually a better fit for me anyway, with working in Helena, living in Helena. I think it made sense to run there and run in a district that was going to be winnable. And, I think the whole transition just made sense to run in Helena instead of that district in Missoula.
Yeah. Do you think that they were kind of scared just because of Cheetah's previous races and how he's been?
Yeah, I think that their policies it's showing itself. They lost 11 seats in the legislature in 2020. The Republicans hold 7 of the 8 statewide offices. Their policies are not resonating with the people of Montana. And so now they're doubling down and doing everything they can to try to hold on to their, territory in Missoula and in Gallatin County. And I think when the Republicans are running a guy like Brad Cheetah, who's got a lot of name recognition, is very well liked in that area, I think they're quaking in their boots a little bit of the thought of him flipping that Senate seat, and they don't want it to happen. So they're going to expend every resource to try to keep that in their hands.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. It's like just the way that it works. That comes down from the DNC National, correct?
Yeah, and I believe it does, and I think they have their own legislative campaign committee, and they're sitting there, and just like the Republicans, plotting and trying to figure out where are areas that they need to double down to hold, where areas they think they can pick up seats. I don't think there's a whole lot of those areas, but I do think that they're trying to hold those seats, and their leadership at a national level and at the state level is saying, look, we got to try to hold that seat, so we'll dump a ton of money into it to try to keep it, in their hands. So that's what they're doing. Nothing we can do about it, unfortunately, but I think it's kind of just, crazy that they're having to dump that much money into a race that they should be able to hold.
Another funny part about this is the candidate that will be running in the same district that you're running now in Helena. Do you want to explain how that race is looking right now?
Yeah, well, he's a socialist. He's a self-proclaimed socialist. This isn't me making this up. He's advocating for high taxes. Actually, I was looking just kind of to learn a little bit about him. And are you familiar with the group Turning Point?
Yeah.
They had an event in Helena a couple months back, and he decided to go on social media and call them, quote, Hitler Youth and Nazis. So, I mean, this is what we're up against in this district, somebody that's not reasonable. He doesn't speak for the people of Montana or the people in that district. His ideas are not in the normal realm of, what would be considered mainstream. Not that that's, a bad thing. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. That's my belief, but I think that Helena families and Montana families can do a lot better than a guy running in a district as a socialist, and telling people he wants to take their freedoms, telling people he wants to, he's advocating for wealth taxes, and just ridiculous proposals that they have no chance of passing through the legislature. Honestly, if he was elected, he'd be the laughing stock of the legislature. Nobody would seriously. I mean, it'd be an embarrassment to that district.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I talked to you previously, the race isn't necessarily decided yet. Like it's not necessarily him and you. There is some time for people to enter the race.
Yep. So there's time for people to enter the race. I'm confident that come, I guess it would be June of next year when the primary is, that I'll be the nominee for the GOP. After conversations with a lot of people, I've got quite a bit of support, and I feel confident that I'll be the nominee. If the Democrats want to have a shot in this district, they might want to come up with something other than a socialist. But if this is what they're going to continue to do, God bless them.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to dive more into your story before like what you're going to focus on when running and all of the different policies and stuff like that. So you went to the University of Montana. How was that as a conservative? I'm going through it as a libertarian. It might be a little easier for me, but like, how is it as a Republican? I see you have a Trump poster on the back and on your wall. So I'm assuming it was a little interesting being a minority there.
It was tough. I think you learn to, frankly, in the classes, you have to put the politics aside if you want to succeed. I mean, when you're talking about a faculty that's probably 80% plus left wing, and they're entitled to those opinions, but you have to learn to get along with everybody, and kind of put the politics aside. It was tough. I think one thing that's interesting and is really kind of sad is there are a lot of conservatives and libertarians on campus, but a lot of them feel like they kind of have to hide. Like if they are open about their beliefs, that they're going to be ostracized and criticized and kind of cast aside on the campus. And it's really sad that that's kind of what our political discourse has come to, that we can't talk about these things and look beyond political views, that's how polarized everything's become. But unfortunately, that's how a lot of people feel. Personally, I was not afraid to share my beliefs and talk about how I felt. And but overall, I did like the University of Montana. I thought it was a good school, got a good education, and it's a college campus. So I think on any college campus, you're gonna deal with a little bit of that, and you just got to learn to kind of get through it, I guess.
I found on the personal level with professors, like there are some really reasonable ones where even if I disagree with them, like we have conversations. And part of that might be just because I'm in the philosophy department. So really
Mhm.
it's a lot of just defending the principles, and they might already be aware of where the principles of certain positions start and stuff like this. But I'm wondering, did you ever get any pushback? Like, is there any story that you remember, or was it pretty easy going through it?
Yeah, so a couple things. Actually, I'll give one shout out to a professor, Christopher Musty. He was a science professor. He was he's pretty moderate. I think he's actually a Democrat, but he's very reasonable and he gets along with everybody and is willing to listen. He actually was the head pollster for the Washington Post during the 2004 presidential campaign. So it's pretty cool that he's teaching at U of M, and I learned a lot from him. I took a lot of classes with him. He knew where I stood, I knew where he stood, and we had a great relationship. So I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah.
Um, on a different note, you know, when we started kind of going through the Zoom classes last year, I had a professor who the class was called political polarization, and the whole idea was how do we get past the polarization in politics. And he thought it would be a good idea on the first day of class to say that, you know, to save our country we needed to beat the hell out of the Republicans, and Trump needed to be in prison, and, you know, just a whole litany of, you know, things. So it was pretty embarrassed. I was embarrassed for him, to be honest, you know, sitting there teaching a class about how we can be less polarized, and he's talking about throwing President Trump into prison. But, you know, you get through it and you'll kind of take it for what it is.
Yeah, it's the funniest thing is like, I I, I think it's important just for me to say that like I used to really like Trump, and I resonate and I sympathize with just like people who voted for him. And
Mm-hmm.
it was so funny that like the more and more libertarian I became, the more criticisms I had. But because of how
Mm-hmm.
deranged certain people were on the left, like with regard to him, like because like I disagreed with him on foreign policy, even though he kind of ran as a non-interventionist candidate. I disagreed with him on certain like gun stuff he did, like the bump stocks and the
Right.
amount of people that he tried to like prosecute and all of this stuff. But then you just saw how the other side reacted, and it was just extremely unreasonable. And you see it on campus. It's pretty bad. But I think that once you get down to the personal level, like I get along with some professors who are pretty openly like socialists, some people who
Mm-hmm.
follow like the Frankfurt School and
Yeah.
all of these philosophers that are kind of the influence of what we're seeing in our culture today. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I think that it is important for people to not necessarily speak out to the point where they're going to get thrown out or cause problems within class, but just like engage with people, because I think at the personal level, that's where you're going to see um, at least people they bring down their walls and they're more willing to speak with each other.
Well, and that's what's so concerning to me, and why I was so concerned when I see the Democrat in my race that's, you know, calling people equating people that he disagrees with the genocide of millions of Jews. I mean, come on, like what are we doing here? You know, I don't have to agree with him. He doesn't have to agree with me, and that's okay. That's what makes America such a great country, that we don't have to agree with each other to engage in a civil dialogue. And it seems to me that, and it's really sad that so many on both sides of the aisle are just putting up barriers and refusing to engage with anybody that might have a little bit of a different opinion with as them.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you graduate?
So actually, so I'm done with classes. I'm graduating this summer with
Oh,
I'm finishing up with internship credits with my job at the AG's office.
cool.
So I'll be graduating this summer, but I'm done with classes finally. So
So is it will you be the youngest person if you're elected then in the legislature?
no, strangely enough, last session, Montana had the youngest legislator in the country, Braxton Mitchell, very good friend of mine. He's up in the Flathead. He represents House District 3.
Mhm.
He's a great guy, really good friend. And when he was elected, I think he was 20 when he got elected. He's 21 now, but yeah. And we also had in House District 50 Representative Stromswald, Mallory Stromswald. She was elected at 22.
Yeah, that's so crazy. So how old are you then?
I'm 22, so I would be the third youngest member. But we've got a lot, I've engaged in a lot of discussions with people that are thinking of running and have now committed to running. And I think you're going to see kind of a youth movement in the legislature. We've got 8 or so candidates running for House seats that are under the age of 25. And I think that's really exciting to see so many young people wanting to get involved. And I've been kind of talking with a lot of them and helping them and picking winnable districts for them to run in. And I think you'll see a lot more young people in the coming couple sessions.
Yeah, that's very exciting. That's great to hear. Um, so with your position with the AG, what are you doing as an intern?
Well, I'm not an intern. I'm getting internship credits. We're, working with you on that, but I work in our communications department and do a lot of stuff there. I kind of help out with a lot of different things, but mostly I've been working with our comm shop, just trying to, get the messaging out, get the messaging right. Because one thing I've learned is that it's so easy to have good policy, have good achievements, and have the messaging get screwed up and it being turned into a negative by the media, which is obviously so one-sided.
Mhm.
And I think that it's important to really work with that. So I've really enjoyed learning a lot and getting a lot of experience in the messaging and press releases and all of that kind of stuff, as well as getting some experience in the legal aspect of things. Funny story, when the legislature sued the Supreme Court, or didn't sue them, served them with subpoenas. I actually got to deliver those subpoenas upstairs to Justice Rice.
Awesome.
So that was fun. That was the highlight of my career.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very big controversy that happened right at the end there. Do you want to just kind
Yeah,
of,
and it's ongoing, but yeah.
yeah, do you want to recount what happened?
Yeah, so basically what happened was there was a bill that the legislature passed, SB 140, that gave the governor the power to appoint judges to courts without having to seek input from the Judicial Nominating Commission, which was a left-leaning group. And the legislature got sued over it, and the Attorney General's office is defending all these lawsuits. And we found out through records requests and through subpoenas that the Supreme Court was and others were prejudging cases before they actually came up. They were voting in online polls through state email and judging cases before they were ever even argued. So once we got that information, the legislature, retained the Department of Justice as their counsel and sent subpoenas to the Supreme Court, which I got to then serve. And since then, it's been one back and forth after another between the justices and the legislature and our office. But we're hopeful that a positive resolution will come to that. It's funny that the justices didn't think that their state emails were public property and they could be reviewed, but
Yeah.
they know now.
So will you be able to still work with the AG if you are elected?
So no, the plan for me is I'm going to work with the AG through next May, and then I'm going to take the time to really focus on campaigning. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, obviously, then I'll be busy in the legislature. If I'm not, then maybe I'll come knocking on Attorney General Knudsen's door again.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, I want to dive into just the positions that you have. I know when you were running in Missoula, a big thing that you were focusing on was property taxes, maybe. And I'm wondering if anything has changed, what you're going to focus on specifically in Helena, and then just, I guess, dive
Yeah.
into where you might be more liberty leaning and stuff like that.
Yeah, so in the Missoula race, and a lot of it's going to transfer to the Helena race too. I've focused on kind of 6 key issues that I wanted to focus my campaign around, property taxes being one of them. But one of the ones that I'm excited to discuss with you is reducing the size and scope of government. That was one that I really wanted to focus on in Missoula specifically, because that local government is totally out of control.
Mhm.
And it's the same way in Helena. You've got a mayor that thinks that he can do whatever he wants, and they're burdening the citizens. So when we talk about reducing the size of government, one of the things I've found just in my short, when I campaigned across the state in 2018 and 2020, and now working for Attorney General Knudsen, people just want to be left alone to live their lives, do what they want to do, go to work, raise their families, enjoy their weekends. They don't want to be told what to do by the government. They don't want to be taxed out of their homes. They just want to be able to live their lives and be left alone. And so often we're seeing these local governments, mayors in other states, state legislatures that have out of control spending. They don't have a clue what they're doing, especially in Missoula, but Helena too, Mayor Collins. He has no idea what he's doing. They have no plan when it comes to fiscal responsibility. They spend money they don't have, and then their solution is, well, we'll just raise taxes.
Mhm.
And we'll just increase fees for things. That's their plan, is spend money they don't have and then figure out how they'll pay for it later by taxing the individuals. And to me, that's just so irresponsible. And I'd like to really see that stop. And I'm all for local government being able to, I'm all for separation of powers. The state, the local, and the federal government all have their own role to play. But I do think that there's a point where the state government has got to get involved and say, look, you're not going to tax Montana citizens out of their homes because you can't be responsible with your money. And so I think that there's some common sense, reasonable things that we can do to get local government out of the lives of the citizens, reduce the size of government. That's one of the things I was so proud of Attorney General Knudsen for doing, is getting rid of a lot of the bureaucrats in the Department of Justice, people that had just been there, just sucking up paychecks, not doing anything. And he campaigned on it and, reducing the size of that department. And he's done it. And I'm so happy that he has, because we don't need thousands and thousands of state employees that
Mhm.
are just, draining the taxpayers dry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there is a very interesting point that you just mentioned about local power, and like there's this constant debate in my head about like where those lines are, because there's kind of like this question of whether or not sovereignty is just as strong of a right as whatever right you're preventing them from in
Mm-hmm.
preventing. So like with LR 130 and everything that kind of like said that Missoula can no longer have these gun laws. There is this question, especially within like libertarian circles, where those lines are. So I'm wondering what you think about that, and then where what you guys can do from the state level, I guess. Like what can you do to
Right.
localities when they overstep, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the main things is we look at the Constitution. Are they following the Constitution? Or are they, blatantly violating the rights of the people? So when
Mhm.
Missoula is trying to restrict gun ownership, or Bozeman or wherever, when it's blatantly violating amendment or something in the Constitution, the state has a right at that point to step in and say, look, you're not gonna violate the Constitution because you have an agenda. So
Mhm.
I think that's one of the lines that I draw. Another thing is, I believe that the local government should be able to run their own, municipalities, but there's got to be a point, and this is something that, having not been in the legislature before, I don't really know what the point is, but there's got to be a point where these people cannot just run roughshod over their citizens and do whatever they want, where there's got to be some kind of reasonable um, check and balance on that system of government, and say, look, you cannot, tax people out of their homes because you want to build bridges to nowhere and homeless camps and everything else. So I don't know where that line is, to be honest with you. I think that's something that we've got to confront, because it's getting out of control in the cities, and we've got to look into. But I don't know. I think that's something that we'll have to, if I get elected, I'll be happy to discuss with my colleagues.
Yeah, and definitely, I mean, like at the very least, I think it really does come down to trying to cultivate cultures within um, those localities and trying to change them at those levels too. Because I mean, really, when it does come, we know that there are conservatives and libertarians in Helena and Missoula. It's just that a percentage of a percentage of a percentage, are voting for these policies. It's like how many people are actually paying attention to politics? It's a small percentage, and how many of those people are voting? It's a small percentage.
Right.
How many people are voting Democrats? It's even smaller. So I think that's kind of a perspective, is like we really need to focus on changing the culture in those cities as well. Something that is very interesting on this topic of localism is the way in which the states have been able to check the national government just within the last year,
Yeah.
last legislative session, which is fantastic. The reason why I'm asking the question about where you draw the line there is because like I see the principles within like the 10th Amendment and federalism as applying also to localities. Like, why would the founders have wanted this relationship? Um,
Hmm.
but it's so great. Like, we're now a gun sanctuary. We're now a
Yep.
marijuana sanctuary, essentially. There
Right.
are so many things that we are doing. We appeal or repealed occupational licensing, at least some of those laws. And it's just, I mean, if I could ask anything of you, like if as a libertarian who is trying to get involved with the Libertarian Party, I just want you guys to pursue that as much as possible because I'm planning on having someone from the 10th Amendment Center on, and
Hmm.
we're going to talk just about like where those powers lie. And the truth is, if you read the Constitution, supremacy clause only allows the Constitution to have certain powers, right? And if they go
Right.
outside of that, state government can nullify it. We saw Clarence Thomas, just was it yesterday or something? He said that, you know, the interstate commerce clause has essentially been, I think he said that the marijuana ban at the national level is no longer necessary or proper. And it's like,
Right.
of course not. Just read the Constitution. But yeah,
Right.
that
And I know we've been having so much fun at the AG's office too, and the Biden administration over there, because they at the federal level, they think they can just do whatever they want, whether it's cancel the Keystone Pipeline unilaterally. We got a big win in court. I think it was last week. Biden put a energy lease moratorium. He said no new drilling on federal lands.
Mhm.
And so 13 states came together and sued him and said, no, look, you don't have that authority.
Yeah.
The Congress regulates interstate commerce, not you. You can't, with a stroke of a pen, just do whatever you want. And we got a big win in court. So now we can go back to drilling. The Keystone Pipeline lawsuit that Montana was leading, unfortunately, the TC Energy canceled the pipeline. But I know that we're still pursuing that in hopes that somebody's going to pick that up. But that's just a couple examples at a state level and in our office how we're protecting the state's rights against federal overreach from the Biden administration, just thinking that they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any other specific policies that you would focus on, or at least when you look at Montana, is there anything that you would like to introduce or anything to change?
Right. So one of the big focuses, one of the other six focuses was protecting Second Amendment rights. So that's going to be something. And I said, look, our Second Amendment is under attack in this country, no doubt about it, from the federal level. And I was happy to see what the legislature did in the last session with protecting gun rights, making Montana a constitutional carry state where you don't have to have a permit to conceal carry. You can just do it.
Mhm.
Um, One thing I plan to introduce in the next session is what the state of South Dakota did, where the legislature gives themselves the authority to review any executive order coming from the federal government to determine whether it's constitutional or not. Because we shouldn't be burdened with having to comply with these illegal, bogus executive orders coming out of Washington, D.C. that Biden, with a stroke of a pen, thinks he can trample on state rights. No. So in the next session of the legislature, I want to bring that to the floor that says, look, we have a right to review these executive orders and determine if we're going to follow it based on the Constitution. So that's one thing I plan to do with it, and that'll apply across the board.
Yeah, I could not applaud you more for that. That is fantastic. I always like when I do think about this, I'm a big states' rights guy. I'm a big nullify guy, but it's on both sides, right? So like I genuinely do think that, and that we might have some disagreement here, but we don't need to get into it. Just about localities, I do question LR 130 and the authority that a state has, or whether or not they ought to have. Like they might have it written down. I just question philosophically these things.
Mhm.
But I think that this also applies to the national government. The state absolutely has a right
Mhm.
to question anything the national government does, especially when they go outside of their vested powers that are clearly expressed in the Constitution. So I mean, I think that that's fantastic. I actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I thought of something very similar, but I didn't think about executive orders. I thought there's a way in which I don't even know if it could work, but like the way that the state is no longer represented by Congress because of whatever amendment it was that made the Senate directly elected. I forget which one.
Mm-hmm.
If the state could somehow consider certain legislation that are passed at the national level, and whether or not they are going to agree with the national government on certain appropriations of tax money, and whether or not they can like hold tax money or send it to the treasury or something like that. I would, man, that, and that's what you just said is along the same lines and probably more legal. So I appreciate that, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you go through all of the 6 things that you had, or
Yeah, so I've got, reducing the size of government. Some of them I'm not going to run on in Helena. It's just not, they were kind of a message for Missoula, but property taxes is one of them, protecting the Second Amendment, protecting our public lands, protecting, they say Second Amendment, reducing the size of government, and now I'm drawing a blank. Those are kind of going to be the big 4 in the Helena race. I think especially when I see what the other side is putting out there, that those 4 become extremely critical to protect. Actually, I did remember returning education to the local level. I think that it's ridiculous that the federal government is trying to mandate programs like critical race theory in the schools. I think it was good that Attorney General Knudsen put an end to that in Montana. But I think local communities, local organizations should be the ones making decisions about what's taught in the classroom. The schools in Helena or Missoula or anywhere else in Montana shouldn't have to, be being told what to teach by the Biden administration. And, our office worked extremely hard on that opinion on critical race theory, that it violates the Civil Rights Act and, a whole bunch of other, clauses in the Constitution. But I think that we really need to focus on returning the local control of schools to local communities. There's no need for the federal government to be getting involved. And one of the things they're doing is they're holding ARPA money over the school's head, saying, look, you need to give us all this access and, include all this stuff if you want the money. If it were up to me, I'd say, keep your money. We're going to, control schools at our level. We don't need your money. We'll teach our kids the best way we see fit.
Dude, you should be running as a libertarian. I know there's not infrastructure here, but it sounds great. It sounds awesome. Like I literally just had a conversation with he was my civics teacher from high school. He's now retired, about the same thing, about how like literally we do not need these funds, or at least like test them, right? Like, okay, you're going to withhold our funding. Okay. Like try it, because what he told me is that it was Governor Schweitzer, I believe. With real IDs, he pushed back the real IDs. The national government was trying to enforce them on Montana, and he essentially said, no, we don't need them. And they threatened to pull like something to do with airplanes, like we couldn't fly them in certain spaces or something like that. And he said, okay. And they backed off. I would encourage that in every way possible, because they do it with our school funding. They do it with highway funding. Like we have the speed limit laws that were changed. We have the alcohol drinking age limits that were changed. And those might be silly issues, but it's still like exploitation in a certain sense. Like that's literally what they're doing. They're holding certain funds hostage to force localities to kind of go over their own self-determination and their own sovereignty. Like that's not democracy in any sense. And they're the ones that like to throw that word around.
To go actually a little bit more in depth in that, that was something I really worked closely with one of our assistant solicitor generals on, was that whole deal with the ARPA money and, critical race, the whole thing with education. And so basically they split the state ARPA money into 3 kind of buckets, and 2 of them were kind of just, we got the money. The third bucket was the one that they were saying, look, here's what we want you to do in order to get this third bucket of money. And there was, they put out a state plan that included, it was probably 7 or 8 pages long, of all of this information that they wanted and access to the schools and things they wanted to be included into education. But when you actually compared that to the rule that was passed in the US Congress for the ARPA money, we found like 8 or 9 violations of where what they were asking for in the state plan was not at all founded in the law that they passed. It was the Biden administration just trying to get all this access in our local education. They wanted specific data that was going to cost the state money. It would cost the state money to get this information. Like, the things they were asking for are not tracked. Like, kids find out the children who don't attend Zoom classes as much as others, and show if they have more behavior issues. And it's like, what are we doing here? We're not going to waste state resources giving the federal government this amount of access and information into our schools. And they were telling the states that in order to get this money, they had to account for equity in education and just all of this ridiculous stuff. And the state was supposed to provide plans for how they were going to do this in order to get the money. And we said, look, no.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, so a question about like the critical race theory then. If you were to like push to make school more local, if like a locality decided to teach critical race theory, would you push and say like that's okay?
Well, look, here's what I think. I think that we shouldn't be getting involved in the local decisions unless you're violating the law. So, if a school wants to teach something that I don't personally agree with, they can teach it as long as they're not violating the law. And that's where a lot of people actually misconstrued what the AG opinion stated. That AG opinion said that you can still teach, these things. You just can't do reverse racism. You can't violate students' civil rights in order to, do whatever you want to do. Like, one thing we saw in a lot of states was privilege walks, where students of one racial group were made to do things that violated their constitutional rights. And so I think that's where I draw the line, that if they're going to violate people's rights, we got to step in there. But if they want to teach things, that should be decided at a local level, and the state should really stay out of it. It should be, and the federal government should certainly stay out of it. It should be local communities deciding what's taught in the classroom.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I'm wondering, does the whatever it was it, what is it, a rule or an opinion? What came out of the AG?
The attorney general's opinion, yep, it carries the weight of law in the state.
Okay. Yeah, so did that opinion apply to private schools then? Like, could CRT guys come together? They could form their own school.
I don't think
CRT?
Right. So don't quote me on this, but I don't think so. I think it was for public schools in the state, taxpayer funded public schools. But it's the type of thing where if the Office of Public Instruction or whoever starts getting reports that another school is violating the law or whatever, then there would be means to have to step in. You can't have schools violating the law. You can't break the law. So, but I think that the opinion itself was specifically for public schools. It said, look, you're not going to break the law in the public schools for, whatever your political agenda is.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would make sense, especially I think you have an even stronger case if federal money is mixing there in a way.
Oh yeah.
But
right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about that you feel like we didn't touch on, please do, and then we can kind of wrap up.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate you having me on. I look forward, I think it's this race that I'm running in is so important. And I think that this next session is going to be so important because of the overreach that we're seeing from the federal level. I think it's so important to find candidates, and anybody that listens to your show, consider getting involved. We got to find people and candidates that are willing to push back and say, look, states have rights. The federal government can't, trample over the states. We're not going to stand for it. And so, there were several good bills that failed by 1 or 2 votes in the last session, where if we had 1 or 2 more liberty-minded conservatives or just liberty-minded individuals in the legislature, we could have gotten some really good things accomplished.
Mhm.
And we had people holding us back. So I think that that's something that I just kind of want to appeal to your listeners. Consider getting involved, consider running for office. It's not as hard as people would make it seem. If you're willing to put in the work, you can make it happen. We already had a poll in this district where I'm up 13 and a half points. So, even a seat that doesn't seem likely, if you're running as a reasonable, liberty-minded person, it can be won. And I just, hope that we'll start to see more young, liberty-minded people thinking about getting involved in government.
Yeah, and 2020 really proved that Montana is a leave me alone, at the very least, a leave me alone Republican state. I would say they're more libertarian than most people think.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, one thing I will say is, I thought it was funny. I did one of those polls online, like where do you fall on the ideological spectrum? And, most people always think of themselves as, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people that identify as conservative, but they're really liberty minded and would kind of fall more in that libertarian line. Because people want to be left alone. They want to do what they want to do, and they just want to be able to not be interfered with by the government.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping that I can grow something with the Libertarian Party. I know you're with the Republican Party, but I if anyone listening does want to get involved, like please reach out, because we are looking to build something here, because maybe have coalitions with Republicans. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. If you want to just pitch all of your information and tell people where they can find your like candidate information and where they can get in contact with you, your social media, please do.
Yeah, great. So again, my name's Alden Tonkay, running in House District 82 in Helena. My website is aldenformontana.com. That's all spelled out, Alden for Montana. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Alden for Montana. You can connect with me there. Online is a great resource. You can contact me, donate, find out more about my positions, see what I want to do. And I'd love to be able to talk with anybody, even if you're not in my district. If you get elected, you're representing the people of Montana. So even if you're not in House District 82, feel free to contact me, reach out, and I'd love to have a dialogue with anybody that wants to. So that's all my information. And, Liam, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's the weekend, we can let go. It's the full send.